U.S. President Donald Trump and his advisor Elon Musk presented a unified front in defending Musk's effort through the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, to eliminate waste and slash the federal workforce. Now, the duo, joined by Musk's 4-year-old son in the Oval Office last night, asserted the discovery of waste and fraud since DOGE began its work some weeks ago, after also being created through executive order. Wearing a Make America Great Again cap, the world's richest man defended his role as unelected official who had been granted unprecedented authority by Trump to dismantle parts of the U.S. government.
Well, first of all, you couldn't ask for a stronger mandate from the public. The public voted, we have a majority of the public voting for President Trump. We've won the House, we won the Senate. The people voted for major government reform. There should be no doubt about that. That was on the campaign. The president spoke about that at every rally. The people voted for major government reform. And that's what people are going to get. They're going to get what they voted for. And a lot of times, people that don't get what they voted for, but in this presidency, they are going to get what they voted for. And that's what democracy is all about. Now, SABC News correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease joins us to broaden the conversation. Sherwin, as always, thank you very much for joining us. It's difficult to keep up with all the executive orders and the day-to-day narrative that emanates from this White House, including questions about the operations of Musk and DOGE and its implications not just on federal government, but also the role of elected members of Congress that largely appear out of the loop.
Mfundo, it's all been a blur for a lot of people, including journalists. You're lucky, I know it's Wednesday, February the 12th, right? So perhaps that's a good starting point. Look, I mean, just in the last couple of days, executive orders imposing 25% tariffs on all countries as it pertains to steel and aluminium imports, no exceptions, no exemptions. So South Africa likely to be caught up in that as well. He was asked earlier this week if he would attend the G20 Leaders Summit later this year, and would not confirm that directly, saying, quote, "We'll see what happens," but again doubling down on calling South Africa a very, very dangerous and bad place for a lot of people, and reasserting that aid funds to South Africa would be suspended until the completion of some sort of investigation. He talked again, doubling down on his proposal to own and redevelop the Gaza Strip and resettle Palestinians away from that area permanently. Of course, he's talked about calling it the Riviera of the Middle East, or a real estate development for the future, Mfundo. And then, of course, very, very key pronouncements by the President of the United States this week, and then echoed by the Israeli Prime Minister, talking about cancelling the U.S. negotiated ceasefire deal between Hamas and Israel, responding to Hamas announcing earlier this week that they would be cancelling until further notice the continued release, the phased release of Israeli hostages, because they accuse Israel of violating tenets of that agreement. Trump expressing some frustration that if all the hostages, more than 70 that are still being held, are not released by noon on Saturday, then he was recommending to Israel that they cancel the deal and then resume fighting, something that has now formally been endorsed by Israel's prime minister, right? And so, given the chaos that we talk about here in terms of the pronouncements that are coming out of the White House, there are a lot of court cases challenging Trump's executive orders, challenging the authority of DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. More than 36, a lot of federal judges have weighed in. So you're going to begin to see this posture of the executive, challenging the judiciary here, which is an equal branch of the U.S. government, right? You have the executive, you have the legislature, and the judiciary, and you're seeing the judges, federal judges, now beginning to weigh in. And you're going to see the posture then shift by this administration, led by Donald Trump, and DOGE by Elon Musk, challenging both the courts and what they're now training their sights on, which is the federal bureaucracy. This is what Elon Musk had to say on that.
If there's not a good feedback loop from the people to the government, and if you have rule of the bureaucrat, if the bureaucracy is in charge, and then what meaning does democracy actually have? If the people cannot vote and have their will be decided by their elected representatives in the form of the president and the Senate and the House, then we don't live in a democracy. We live in a bureaucracy. So it's incredibly important that we close that feedback loop, we fix that feedback loop, and that the public's elected representatives, the President, the House, and the Senate, decide what happens, as opposed to a large, unelected bureaucracy.
And Mfundo, what we are hearing from ethics experts, they're questioning how someone that is the CEO of companies in the main, Tesla, SpaceX, Starlink, that have billions of dollars worth of contracts with the federal government, now imposing his oversight over those very federal departments. So it's going to be a very, very interesting course and pathway to observe here in terms of the courts weighing in, the posture of the executive, and what the role of the United States Congress is going to be here as a co-equal branch of government. Remember, they are both now controlled, both houses controlled by Republicans that have avoided challenging this president's executive orders to date.
But I suppose with all this litigation, then it would seem as though there would be some sort of delay in implementing some of those policies, or at least what they committed to the electorate. But have there been any key developments, if we shifted our focus, since the Trump executive order against South Africa, and what might be the next step there?
Well, the president again asked a very specific question as to whether he would attend the G20 Leaders Summit, given his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, earlier this month announcing that he would not be attending the G20 Foreign Ministers Summit at the end of this month. So the question was really pertaining as to whether this was the posture now of the Trump administration. He avoided answering that question, just reasserting that bad things were happening. And remember, the framing, Mfundo, of his executive order was to sort of impugn South Africa's human rights. In terms of alleged human rights violations, perhaps as it pertained to land expropriation or allegations as it pertains to white minority Afrikaners. So we reached out to the UN Human Rights Office in Geneva, and we basically said to them, what is your response or reaction to the decision that is sort of casting aspersions around South Africa's human rights policies here? And they wrote back saying, redressing South Africa's racially imbalanced land ownership is vital to addressing the historical injustices of the apartheid era and fostering a more equitable future. The recently adopted law, they're referring there to the Expropriation Act, marks a critical step on that journey. We call on the authorities to ensure its implementation aligns with the protections enshrined in South Africa's constitution and complies with international human rights standards. So the United Nations Human Rights Office disagreeing with the premise, right, the preface here of Donald Trump's executive orders. Of course, they'd mention other things, the ICJ case against Israel, South Africa's purportedly close relationship with Iran and other things here. But I think we're basically looking to see the team that the South African government names in terms of a team that will come here and engage with the Trump administration. But we're also beginning to see Ambassador Ibrahim Rasool engage more with local media in the United States to put South Africa's position forward. But to be clear, Mfundo, there are so many things happening domestically here that South Africa's executive order hasn't received that much play on certainly the cable news channels here in the United States.
I suppose it's a little bit of comfort in that respect, but also just that specific statement, at least if an Ibrahim Rasool is now accounting or trying to explain the Expropriation Act, at least he's got others such as the UN who seem to be backing South Africa's position. But then on Gaza, President Trump has expressed willingness to use the leverage of economic and military aid to countries like Egypt and Jordan to pressure them into taking Palestinians from Gaza for permanent resettlement. But this has been repudiated by both countries and the region, in essence, not so?
Yeah, the Arab League has repudiated it. In fact, very frustrated by Donald Trump's proposal here to have the United States assume control and ownership of Gaza, resettling Palestinians permanently without the right of return, and of course hosting King Abdullah II of Jordan yesterday at the White House, a very uncomfortable engagement in the Oval Office, given Jordan, Egypt, and the Arab League's disposition towards the Trump proposal. Jordan's king then taking to X right after that meeting, saying Jordan remains steadfast against the displacement of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. This is the unified Arab position. In addition to that, we are getting news out of Egypt, out of Cairo in Egypt, that President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi of Egypt will not attend an invitation, will not take up an invitation to visit the White House if the Trump's resettlement plan to displace Palestinians remains on the agenda. Trump, of course, I mean, there are pitfalls here, right? Trump, of course, has said that he's willing to use economic and military aid as leverage to get his will here. But certainly the position from Arab nations in the main and the United Nations broadly is that this would be a violation of international law. They're dead against it. The question is, what will Trump do now to impose his will here? That's something we're certainly watching very, very closely, Mfundo.
And we trust you to update us as soon as there are more developments. Sherwin, as always, thank you very much for that reportage. That's Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC News correspondent in New York for us.